Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I want to speak to you today about a truth that will stir your spirit and ignite your faith. Your wait is almost over. I don't know what you've been praying for. I don't know what battles you've been fighting. But I do know this God is faithful. And when He makes a promise, He always keeps it. Waiting on God is not wasted time. It may feel like nothing is happening, but in reality, God is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. Often we become frustrated when our prayers are not answered immediately. We wonder why the job hasn't come, why the relationship hasn't been restored, why the healing hasn't manifested. But God is not ignoring you. He is not punishing you. He is preparing you. Every moment of waiting is a moment of refining, shaping, and equipping you for what's ahead. When a farmer plants a seed, he doesn't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. He waters it, nurtures it, and trusts that in due time it will sprout. The same is true for your life. The promises God has spoken over you may not have come to pass yet, but that doesn't mean they won't. It just means they are still in the process of growing. And just like a seed, sometimes the most growth happens in the unseen places deep in the soil where roots are being established. In Scripture, we see many examples of people who had to wait on God's promises. Abraham was promised that he would be the father of many nations, yet he and Sarah waited 25 years before Isaac was born. During those years, it would have been easy for Abraham to doubt, to give up, to believe that maybe he had misunderstood God. But Abraham held on to faith, and at the appointed time, God fulfilled His word. If Abraham had given up halfway through, he would have missed out on the blessing. That's why waiting requires trust. Trust that God's timing is better than ours. Trust that He sees the full picture, and trust that He is always working for our good. Waiting also teaches patience and dependence on God. In a world that values speed, instant results, and immediate gratification, waiting feels unnatural. We live in a culture where everything is at our fingertips: fast food, fast internet, fast solutions. But God does not operate on human schedules. He is never late, but He is also never rushed. The waiting season is where He teaches you to lean on Him, to seek Him more deeply, and to grow in faith. It is in these moments that your relationship with God strengthens. You learn to trust His voice, to find peace in His presence, and to believe that He is enough whether or not your circumstances change immediately. Many times, God allows waiting to protect us from stepping into something prematurely. Just because something is good doesn't mean it's good for you right now. A blessing given too soon can become a burden. If a young person inherits a great sum of money without the wisdom to manage it, they may squander it. If a person enters a relationship before they are emotionally healed, they may sabotage it. God in His love and wisdom knows when you are truly ready for what He has promised. If you feel like He is delaying something, consider that He might actually be protecting you. There is also a preparation process happening while you wait. Just as Joseph was prepared in the prison before becoming second in command in Egypt, and David was trained in the fields before becoming king, you too are being prepared. What you learn in the waiting will equip you for the blessing. The struggles you face, the lessons you gain, the faith that is strengthened, these are all necessary for the next season. If God gave you everything you asked for the moment you prayed for it, you wouldn't develop endurance, wisdom, or spiritual maturity. It is in the waiting that these qualities are formed. It is important to stay faithful in the waiting. Instead of complaining or giving in to doubt, continue to pray, worship, and serve. The enemy will try to convince you that waiting is pointless, that God has forgotten you, that you should take matters into your own hands. But Scripture reminds us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will rise above their circumstances with endurance and perseverance. The waiting season is not a wasted season, it is strengthening season. God's promises are sure, and His plans for you are greater than anything you could imagine. If you are in a season of waiting, don't let discouragement take root. Instead, see it as a divine appointment, a time where God is working in you, through you, and for you. He is preparing you, positioning you, and making a way where there seems to be none. What He has spoken will come to pass at the right time, in the right way, and for His glory. Even when it seems like nothing is happening, God is always at work behind the scenes. In moments of silence, when prayers seem unanswered and doors remain closed, it is easy to believe that God is distant or inactive. But faith is about trusting in what we cannot see. Just because we don't see immediate evidence of God's movement doesn't mean He isn't orchestrating something incredible on our behalf. He is aligning circumstances, preparing people, and shifting things into place to fulfill His promises at the appointed time. Throughout the Bible, there are countless examples of how God worked behind the scenes in ways people never expected. Joseph, for instance, had dreams of greatness, yet his life seemed to move in the opposite direction. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, and thrown into prison, it would have been easy for Joseph to assume that God had abandoned him. But in every season of hardship, God was silently arranging things. While Joseph was in prison, God was working in Pharaoh's palace. While Joseph was waiting, God was preparing the opportunity that would elevate him. When the time was right, everything shifted in a single moment, and Joseph was placed in a position of power that not only fulfilled his dreams, but also saved an entire nation. God often works in ways that are beyond human understanding. When the Israelites were trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, fear took hold. They couldn't see a way out. And in their desperation, they doubted Moses and even questioned God's plan. But what they didn't realize was that God had already made a way. He wasn't just working in their present situation. He had been working long before they arrived at that moment. He had led them to that exact place so that he could reveal his power by parting the Red Sea. The miracle had been in motion before they even knew they needed it. In our own lives, we often look for signs of progress, evidence that God is answering our prayers. But sometimes God chooses to work in ways that are hidden from us. A person praying for a new job may not realize that God is already speaking to someone in a hiring position about them. Someone seeking healing may not see how God is aligning the right doctors, the right treatments, and the right moment for their breakthrough. The absence of visible change does not mean the absence of divine activity. God is always working, even when we can't perceive it. One of the greatest challenges of faith is trusting in God's unseen hand. Human nature desires control, certainty, and tangible results. But God operates on a higher level. His ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are beyond our comprehension. Just as a builder constructs the foundation of a house before the structure becomes visible, God lays the groundwork for our blessings long before we recognize them. The foundation is the most important part of any building, yet it remains unseen. Likewise, God's unseen work is often the most crucial part of his plan for our lives. Waiting on God requires patience and trust. It demands belief in his character rather than just in our circumstances. When things don't seem to be changing, it is tempting to take matters into our own hands, forcing doors open that God has not yet unlocked. But when we rush ahead of God, we risk stepping into something that is not yet fully prepared. Sarah and Abraham made this mistake when they tried to fulfill God's promise in their own way, leading to consequences that lasted for generations. If they had trusted in God's perfect timing, they would have avoided unnecessary hardship. Even in moments of silence, God is speaking. He is speaking through the lessons learned in the waiting. He is speaking through the small, seemingly insignificant details that later turn out to be part of a much bigger picture. He is speaking through the people he places in our lives, the doors he closes, and the ones he is preparing to open. The challenge is to remain faithful, to listen, and to trust that he is always at work. God's hand is never idle. He is orchestrating connections, setting things into motion, and ensuring that every piece falls into place at the right time. What may seem like a delay is often divine preparation. Just as an artist works behind the canvas, adding layers and depth before revealing the masterpiece, God is shaping a future far greater than anything we could imagine. Though we may not see it now, we will one day look back and realize that he was working all along, making a way where there seemed to be none. Difficult seasons often come right before a breakthrough. Life has a way of pressing hardest just before something great happens. Many times, when people are on the verge of stepping into their blessings, challenges increase, resistance becomes stronger, and everything seems to work against them. It is in these moments that doubt can creep in, discouragement can take hold, and giving up may seem like the easiest option. But what often appears to be the worst season is actually a sign that something great is on the horizon. The enemy does not attack those who are standing still. He targets those who are moving forward. Throughout Scripture, some of the greatest miracles and breakthroughs happened right after the darkest moments. When the Israelites were fleeing Egypt, they faced an impossible situation, Pharaoh's army behind them and the Red Sea in front of them. Fear and panic overwhelmed them, and many thought it was over. But in that very moment, when there seemed to be no way forward, God parted the sea and made a path where there was none. The struggle they faced was not a sign that God had abandoned them. It was proof that they were on the brink of something miraculous. Joseph's life is another example of how darkness often precedes breakthrough. After receiving dreams of greatness from God, his life took an unexpected turn. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Everything seemed to move in the opposite direction of what God had shown him. But in a single moment, everything changed. The very prison that seemed like the end of his story became the place where his elevation began. He was called before Pharaoh, given a position of authority, and saw his dreams come to pass. What looked like a series of setbacks was actually preparation for the fulfillment of God's promise. Job experienced the darkest season of his life before his greatest restoration. He lost everything: his health, his wealth, and his family. Friends accused him, and it seemed as if God had completely turned away from him. But in the midst of his suffering, God was still working. His pain was not permanent. His struggles were not the end. In the right moment, God restored everything to him, giving him back more than he had lost. The life of Jesus himself is the greatest example of how darkness comes before victory. The crucifixion was the most painful, devastating event for his followers. When he was nailed to the cross, buried in the tomb, and all seemed lost, it looked like the end. But 3 days later, the greatest breakthrough in history took place. Jesus rose from the grave, conquering death and fulfilling the promise of salvation. The darkness of the cross was necessary for the light of the resurrection. In life, moments of great pressure are often indicators that something is shifting. A woman in labor experiences the most intense pain right before the baby is born. A seed buried in the ground must break open before it can sprout into something new. There is a process of breaking before there is growth. It is uncomfortable, painful, and often confusing, but it is always necessary. Without the breaking, there is no breakthrough. Difficult seasons test faith, but they also refine character. They teach patience, endurance, and dependence on God. If everything happened easily, faith would never grow. It is in the struggle that people learn to trust God more deeply. It is in the waiting that people develop spiritual strength. The storm may feel overwhelming, but it will not last forever. The night may seem long, but the morning is coming. Many give up too soon, right when they're on the verge of stepping into something great. If Joseph had lost faith in prison, he would never have made it to the palace. If the Israelites had turned back in fear, they would never have seen the Red Sea part. If Job had cursed God and walked away, he would have missed his double portion. The breakthrough is always closer than it appears, but it requires perseverance. Those who hold on, who continue to trust, who refuse to give up, those are the ones who see the promises of God come to pass. God never wastes pain. Every challenge has a purpose, every trial has a lesson, and every difficulty is part of a greater plan. Even when it feels like everything is falling apart, God is still in control. He specializes in turning things around and bringing beauty from ashes, and in using what was meant for harm to bring about good. No matter how difficult things may seem, no matter how much pressure is building, no matter how dark the situation appears, the story is not over. The very thing that seems to be working against you may actually be the thing that God is using to propel you forward. The darkest moments are often the ones right before the breakthrough. And those who hold on will see the goodness of God in ways they never imagined. Faith is not just believing when things are easy. It is holding on when there is no visible reason to hope. In seasons of waiting, it can be tempting to let doubt take over, to question whether God is really listening, or to feel like giving up on what He has promised. But true faith is not based on what is seen. It is based on confidence in God's character. Keeping faith alive while waiting means trusting that God is still working, even when there is no evidence of change. It means choosing to worship instead of worry, to pray instead of panic, and to stand firm even when nothing seems to be happening. Many people in the Bible had to hold on to faith while waiting. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations, yet for years he and Sarah remained childless. Every day that passed was another opportunity for doubt to creep in. But Abraham chose to believe that God would do what he said, even when circumstances said otherwise. His faith was not in what he could see, but in the God who had spoken the promise. And at the appointed time, Isaac was born, proving that God is always faithful to His word. Faith is tested most in moments of silence. When there are no signs of progress, it can feel like God has forgotten. But silence does not mean absence. In the natural world, seeds take time to sprout. A farmer does not dig up his crops every day to check if they are growing. He trusts the process. The same is true in life. Just because something is not visible does not mean it is not happening. God is often working behind the scenes, preparing the right people, the right opportunities, and the right timing for the fulfillment of His promises. Waiting seasons are also refining seasons. They reveal what is truly in the heart. It is easy to have faith when things are going well, but real trust is built when there is no immediate evidence of an answer. Waiting exposes impatience, pride, and self-reliance. It forces a deeper dependence on God, stripping away the desire for control and replacing it with complete surrender. Those who endure the process come out stronger with a faith that is unshakable. One of the ways to keep faith alive while waiting is to stay connected to God through prayer and worship. Prayer is not just about asking for things. It is about building a relationship with the one who holds all things in his hands. Worship shifts the focus away from the problem and onto God's greatness. It reminds the soul that he is still in control, that he is still worthy of praise, and that no delay can cancel his promises. In Scripture, Paul and Silas were thrown into prison, but instead of complaining, they chose to worship. Their faith unlocked the miraculous, and in a moment, the prison doors opened. Faith-filled worship in the waiting season is powerful. It invites the presence of God and strengthens the heart. Another key to sustaining faith is to guard against negativity. It is easy to become discouraged when surrounded by doubt and fear. The enemy often uses delay as a tool to plant thoughts of hopelessness, to make people believe that things will never change. But faith requires discipline over thoughts and words. Speaking life, declaring God's promises, and surrounding oneself with encouraging voices are essential in keeping faith strong. What is spoken has power. When thoughts of doubt come, they must be replaced with words of truth. God honors persistence. There is a difference between waiting passively and waiting with expectation. The woman with the issue of blood had been suffering for 12 years, yet she refused to accept her situation as permanent. She believed that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. Her faith pushed her to action, and as a result, she received her breakthrough. Faith is not just sitting back and hoping something happens. It is actively believing, preparing, and positioning oneself for what God has promised. Faith is also strengthened through remembering past victories. Looking back at what God has already done builds confidence for what he will do next. David, before facing Goliath, recalled how God had helped him defeat the lion and the bear. That past faithfulness gave him the courage to step into the new challenge with boldness. When waiting feels long, remembering past answered prayers fuels the assurance that God will come through again. God's timing is perfect. What may feel like a delay is often divine preparation. The waiting period is not meant to break faith, but to build it. If something has not happened yet, it is either because the timing is not right or because something greater is in store. Faith is trusting that God's way is better than human understanding. When the answer finally comes, it will be evident that every moment of waiting had a purpose. Those who keep faith alive, who trust through the silence, and who stand firm despite the delay will see the fulfillment of what God has promised. God's timing is not just good, it is perfect. People often want immediate answers, quick solutions, and instant breakthroughs, but God operates on a different timeline. He sees the full picture from beginning to end and knows exactly when the right moment has arrived. What may feel like a delay is often divine alignment, ensuring that everything falls into place in the best possible way. Trusting in God's perfect timing means believing that he is not forgotten, that he is not late, and that when the time is right, everything will come together in ways beyond human understanding. In the Bible, there are countless stories of people who had to wait for God's appointed time. Joseph had dreams of leadership and influence, but he spent years in slavery and prison before stepping into his destiny. Every step of his journey seemed to push him further from the fulfillment of God's promise, yet each moment was part of a divine plan. If Joseph had been released from prison too early, he would not have been in the right position to interpret Pharaoh's dream and step into his role as a leader. The timing was not just about him, it was about an entire nation that would be saved because of his position. Abraham and Sarah longed for a child, and God promised them a son. Yet year after year passed with no fulfillment of that promise. It would have been easy to assume that God had forgotten or that his timing was off. But at the exact right moment, when it seemed impossible, Isaac was born. If Isaac had been born earlier, it would not have been the miraculous testimony that it became. God wanted to show that his promises are fulfilled in ways that defy human limitations. God's timing also protects. Sometimes when things do not happen according to personal expectations, it is because God is shielding from something unseen. A job opportunity that falls through may be preventing future hardship. A relationship that does not work out may be God's way of redirecting towards something better. What seems like rejection is often divine redirection. The disappointment of the present may be setting up the joy of the future. Looking back, many people realize that the things they once desperately wanted would not have been good for them in the long run. What felt like a painful delay was actually divine protection. Waiting on God's timing builds faith, trust, and patience. It teaches dependence on Him rather than on personal plans. In a culture that values speed and immediate results, waiting can feel like a waste of time. But in God's kingdom, waiting is a time of preparation. Just as a seed must remain in the soil before it can grow into a tree, people must go through seasons of development before stepping into what God has planned for them. David was anointed as king while he was still a shepherd, but he had to go through years of trials and leadership lessons before he could take the throne. If he had been crowned immediately, he would not have been the leader that Israel needed. When something is truly from God, it will happen at the right time and in the right way. Trying to force a blessing before its time can lead to unnecessary struggles. Sarah and Abraham, in their impatience, tried to fulfill God's promise on their own by having a child through Hagar. But that decision brought conflict and pain for generations. When people try to rush ahead of God, they often create complications that could have been avoided by waiting. God's timing is also about His glory. When things happen in His perfect timing, there is no doubt that it was His hand at work. The Israelites stood at the edge of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them. If they had crossed earlier, it would have been an ordinary journey. But because God waited until the last possible moment, the miracle of the parting of the sea was undeniable. The same is true in life. When God moves at just the right time, there is no question that it was His doing. Trusting God's timing requires surrender. It means letting go of personal timelines, expectations, and deadlines. It means saying, God, I trust You, even when I don't understand. It is an act of faith to believe that His plans are better, His ways are higher, and His timing is perfect. When things do not happen as expected, the choice is to either grow discouraged or grow in trust. Those who trust will eventually see that God was working all along, aligning everything in ways they never could have imagined. When the waiting season ends and the breakthrough arrives, it becomes clear why things had to happen in a specific way. Every delay, every closed door, and every unexpected turn was leading to something greater. In hindsight, what once felt like a long wait will make perfect sense. God is never late, never early. He is always right on time. When God moves, things can change in an instant. A situation that has remained stagnant for years can shift overnight. A door that seemed permanently closed can suddenly swing wide open. A breakthrough that once felt impossible can become reality in a moment. God's power is not limited by time, circumstances, or human expectations. He is sovereign, and when the appointed time comes, nothing can stop His plan from unfolding. No opposition is too strong, no obstacle is too great, and no delay is permanent when God decides that the waiting season is over. The Bible is filled with moments when God intervened suddenly, bringing an end to long seasons of waiting. Joseph was in prison for years, forgotten by those he helped, yet in a single day he was called before Pharaoh, given a position of power, and saw his life transformed. One moment he was wearing prison clothes, and the next he was wearing royal garments. The years of waiting may have felt endless, but when God moved, it happened swiftly and without warning. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for generations, crying out to God for deliverance. For years, nothing changed, and it seemed as if their suffering would never end. But when God's time arrived, things shifted rapidly. Plague after plague struck Egypt, and what had seemed like an unbreakable stronghold collapsed. Pharaoh, who had stubbornly refused to let them go, suddenly commanded them to leave. The people who had been slaves one day walked into freedom the next. Paul and Silas were in prison, chained and locked away. There was no visible way out, and yet, as they worshiped God, an earthquake shook the foundations of the prison, and in an instant, their chains fell off. The same guards who once held them captive became the ones who led them to freedom. The shift was sudden, unexpected, and undeniably the work of God. God moves in ways that defy human logic. In natural circumstances, change often seems gradual, step by step. But divine intervention does not follow human reasoning. A barren womb can be opened, a sick body can be healed, a financial crisis can be turned around, and a broken relationship can be restored all in a moment. What has taken years to build can be transformed in an instant when God steps in. The enemy often tries to convince people that their situation will never change. He whispers that things will always be this way, that breakthrough is too far away, and that hope is wasted. But those who stand firm in faith know that God is not limited by time or impossibilities. Just as the walls of Jericho fell in an instant after years of Israel's wandering, just as Lazarus walked out of the tomb after being dead for 4 days, and just as Peter was freed from prison when an angel opened the gates, God still moves suddenly. There are seasons of waiting, preparation, and refining, but there also comes a moment when the wait is over. God does not forget his promises. He does not abandon his people in the process. He works behind the scenes, setting things in place, and when everything is ready, he acts swiftly. One phone call, one opportunity, one divine connection, one word from God can change everything. The pain of waiting is nothing compared to the joy of seeing the promise fulfilled. Trusting in God's ability to move suddenly requires unwavering faith. It means believing that even when nothing appears to be happening, God is still at work. It means standing firm, refusing to be discouraged, and knowing that when the time is right, everything will shift. Those who remain steadfast, who continue to pray, worship, and trust will see how quickly God can turn things around. When the moment of breakthrough arrives, it will make sense why the waiting was necessary. The delays will no longer feel like disappointments, but like divine positioning. What seem like setbacks will be recognized as setups for something greater. The testimony will not just be about how long the wait was, but about how suddenly and powerfully God moved when the time was right. When he acts, it is undeniable, unstoppable, and perfectly orchestrated.